They called it the New Eden. Lush California lands, fertile valleys, and endless sunlight. Every broadside, every town meeting echoed the promise, a paradise waiting for those brave enough to claim it. When George Donner, a 62-year-old farmer, loaded his wagons beside his younger brother Jacob, he could not have foreseen the white grave that awaited them. 90 pioneers, men, women, and children, formed what would be called the Donner-Reed Party. They left late, already behind other wagon trains. But spirits were high, and the wagons shone like small ships of hope across the prairie seas. The mornings are clear and filled with birdsong. I believe we are bound for a better world. Tamsen Donner, Journal, June 18. They were warned against taking shortcuts. But ambition is the child of desperation. When a new route, the Hastings Cutoff, was proposed, promising to shave weeks off the trail, the Donners agreed. Few knew that its author, Lansford Hastings, had never traveled the path himself. Historians note, the so-called shortcut led them through the Great Salt Lake Desert, a mirage-strewn wasteland that devoured men and oxen alike. The wagons sank into the salt flats. Water ran out. Children licked dew from canvas in the mornings. Oxen collapsed and were shot where they fell. George Donner wrote little, his hands trembled too badly to hold a pen. Our feet crack and bleed. We boil our belts for broth. One child buried today. I no longer speak the name. Anonymous entry, believed to be Virginia Reed, age 13. By the time they reached the Sierra Nevada, the party was fractured, physically, emotionally, morally. Snow began to fall in early November. A blizzard roared down like the voice of God. In hours, the trail was gone, buried under 10 feet of snow. The wagons circled below the frozen trees, tents became coffins of canvas and frost. We hear the wind and think it screams our names. Patrick Breen, Journal. The oxen froze standing. Meat spoiled. They built crude cabins from logs and wagon wood. Some prayed. Some cursed. And in the night, the wolves began to circle. Children dream of bread. My fingers blacken at the tips. There is no sound but the breathing of the doomed. Tamsen Donner. By this point, nearly 24 emigrants were stranded by snow drifts up to 20 feet deep. The nearest settlement was more than 100 miles away. No food remained, and the howling winds made escape impossible. Rescue would not come for months. The mountain, indifferent and eternal, waited to see what hunger would do to the human soul. The snow fell without mercy. Day after day it layered the wagons until they disappeared beneath pale drifts. Firewood hissed and smoked, too damp to burn. The cabins they built from split pine were half buried now, their roofs groaning like tired beasts. Inside, the settlers burned anything they could spare, handles of tools, chair legs, even scraps of leather. The smell of scorched hide filled the air. Our oxen are gone. The hides hang frozen outside. We gnaw them when the stomach pains grow too sharp. Children whimpered through the nights. Mothers tore strips from their own dresses to bind frostbitten fingers. Outside, the forest creaked beneath the weight of snow, and sometimes, only sometimes, they swore they heard movement beyond the trees. George Donner, trapped miles back with a broken axle and an injured hand, remained at Alder Creek with a smaller group. The rest waited by the lake for rescue that never came. I dream of bread baking. I wake and smell nothing. By mid-December the council was called, what the journals later called the Forlorn Hope. 15 volunteers would attempt to cross the mountains on foot to reach help in California. They prepared snowshoes from ox bows and rawhide. There was no ceremony, only silence. We leave in the morning. The snow lies as deep as a man. Should we perish, tell our mothers we tried. The others watched them vanish into the white, small figures against an endless wall of storm. When the sound of their steps faded, the lake camp grew quieter still. Time lost meaning. Days bled together like melting candles. Children's bellies swelled with starvation. Breen wrote of prayers repeated until the lips cracked. I see the boys' eyes sink in their heads. We thank God for each small mercy, a pine cone that burns longer than expected. Virginia Reed, only 13, described in her later recollections how the grown-ups stopped talking about spring. They began to whisper instead. About the frozen cattle lying beneath the snow. About the bodies buried near the camp. About the sound that might be wind, or something scratching at the cabin walls. The wind wails as though alive. For those 15 who left, the journey was worse than death. Their snowshoes sank deep, storms erased their tracks. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes. By the 6th day, 4 had died. The rest sat in a ring, hollow-eyed, and made the decision no one would later speak aloud. We took flesh to live. I gave confession before tasting. When one of them died, the others divided what could be saved. Each mouthful was both life and curse. By the time they reached the Bear Valley, only 7 remained standing. They were rescued by settlers, faces blackened with frost and shame. When relief parties later retraced their route, they found evidence of what the survivors could not bring themselves to say. Bones split for marrow. Buttons, hair, and scraps of clothing preserved in the snow. Yet the journals remain mostly quiet, perhaps mercy silenced the pen. Hunger had broken language itself. Meanwhile, those left behind waited through January's dark. No birds sang. The snow was higher than the cabins now, men dug tunnels through it to fetch air. The lake froze solid. Wolves no longer approached, they knew there was nothing left to take. This morning we boiled a piece of green hide and shared it among 8. It gave us strength enough to bury the child. That night, the northern lights shimmered above the mountains, green curtains folding in silence. To the survivors it looked like the gates of heaven opening and closing again, too far away to reach. January 1847. The year began without sound. The snow had climbed past the roofs and sealed the cabins in half-darkness. When the wind stopped, every creak of timber or breath of smoke could be heard as though underwater. Inside Breen's cabin, 6 families waited through the hours by the dying fire. The last oxhide was gone. Children slept in bundles of blankets so stiff with frost they cracked when moved. We cannot keep a fire all night. Wood too scarce. No food since Sunday. We pray for rescue or rest. At Alder Creek, George Donner lay on a cot with his wounded hand swollen and black. Tamsin Donner wrote by the light of tallow scraps, her ink frozen in its bottle. George grows weaker. The wind moans in the pines like a soul in torment. I tell the children stories so they will not listen. On the 17th, shouts echoed from the trees. A dozen men, emigrants from Sutter's Fort, had fought through the drifts. They found the cabins half buried, the people inside pale as ghosts. Historians note, this was the first relief, later called the first rescue party. They recorded the smell of smoke and sickness, and the settlers' eyes, like those of animals too long in a cage. The rescuers distributed what little food they carried. Then they led 21 of the weakest towards safety. Not all would make it down the pass. The rescuers wept when they saw us. One man dropped to his knees. They feared to ask how many lay buried. Half the company remained, too frail to travel, or unwilling to abandon kin. They watched the rescuers vanish into the White Valley. For 3 days the sky cleared, then the storm returned heavier than before. The snow falls faster now. We are alone again. The others speak softly and do not look one another in the face. When food failed, silence replaced prayer. They stopped marking the days. Children asked for their mothers long after the voices had gone quiet. The journals from this period grow uncertain, pages half-written, ink frozen, entries ending mid-sentence. Dr. Warren's margin note, written years later, summarizes what the records could not bear to say. Between the 20th of January and the arrival of the second relief, several succumbed to exposure and starvation. Those who survived did so by means they chose never again to name. At the Donner's smaller camp, time folded inward. Tamsin tended to George and their 5 children. When neighbors came asking for provisions, she gave what she could: books, a quilt, a single biscuit. It is the hardest season of my life. The children speak of the garden at home. I tell them the snow will melt and flowers will grow again here. Each dawn she stepped outside to look east, where the pass curved down toward California. No figures appeared. Only the unbroken glare of sun on snow, so bright it burned the eyes. From January to February 1847 the temperature at Truckee Lake remained below zero. The cabins, when excavated later that spring, showed evidence of remarkable ingenuity: chimneys made from split trunks, snow tunnels for air, melted snow stored in kettles of bark. But human endurance has limits. A diary ends with only these words: "We wait." When the second and third reliefs finally reached the camps in March, less than half of the original company were alive. March 1847. When the second relief party reached Truckee Lake, the storm had broken for a single day. The men climbed through drifts higher than the pines. They expected ruin, they found something quieter, heavier. Smoke rose from only 2 chimneys. The rest lay silent under the snow. We called out. From one cabin a woman answered, her voice small as a child's. We entered to find the living and the lost together. The rescuers fed those still conscious with spoonfuls of broth. They led a handful down the mountain while promising to return for the others once weather cleared again. Each mile of descent was marked by bodies abandoned in the snow. We could not take them all. It shames me still. At the Donner's camp, the cabins stood apart, buried almost to the eaves. Tamsin Donner refused to leave her husband, whose wound had worsened beyond hope. She pressed her children into the arms of the rescuers, one by one. Take them. Tell them their mother's love is with them in every mile. The children were carried away on improvised sleds, their eyes closed against the glare. Tamsin remained behind, a single figure in the doorway as the storm began again. A final group climbed into the Sierra a month later. Spring sun glittered on thawing drifts, the forest smelled of sap instead of smoke. They reached the lake to find only traces, a few cabins standing, a handful of survivors waiting outside as if time had stopped. Historians note, the records from this, third relief, list 22 persons rescued, 42 dead. The precise number may never be known. The rescuers wrote little of what they saw inside. Their silence became the last mercy the mountain allowed. Those who returned to the settlements did not speak easily. Newspapers made them legends or monsters, but most wished only to forget. By summer the snow melted, revealing wagons splintered like driftwood and household things rusting in the mud, a cradle, a locket, a child's slate. The mountain grew quiet again. Grass covers the graves. Birds nest in the cabins. Only the wind keeps the story. Virginia Reed. I have tried to remember my father's courage and my mother's faith, not the hunger. The mountains took many, but they did not take our will to live. In the study of disasters, numbers often replace names. Yet the Donner Party reminds us that every statistic is a heartbeat interrupted by weather, distance, and hope. The Sierra Nevada still stands unchanged, the lake reflecting clouds that no longer remember the faces below. What remains are the words left behind, the quiet, shivering ink that says simply, "We wait." When the last rescuers and their few charges crossed the lower ridge, spring had already touched the valley. The snow gave way to soft mud and the smell of grass. Men wept openly when they saw bare ground again. The children were carried on horseback, wrapped in wool blankets too large for their shrunken frames. Each turn of the trail revealed a warmer wind. The roar of the Yuba River below sounded to them like the voice of salvation. We saw green leaves again. It was as if the world had forgiven us. In the foothills they met settlers who had come out to help. Some turned away, unable to look at the faces of those returned from the mountains, others pressed food and water into their hands and said nothing. Captain Sutter opened his storehouse without question. The survivors were laid in tents beside the river. Doctors recorded fever, frostbite, and delirium, yet the greater illness was silence. When asked to tell their story, most simply stared at the ground. Historians note, John Stark and William Eddy, members of the Reliefs, later described the rescued as polite, grateful, and unwilling to speak of the hills. Only after months did a few begin to dictate accounts to ministers and newspapermen. George Donner never left the mountains. His wife Tamsin remained beside him, seen by the last relief sitting quietly at dusk, reading aloud from a small book. They rest together still in that range. For years afterward, Virginia Reed struggled to reconcile the two worlds, the green of California and the white of the Sierra. In 1871 she wrote her recollections, not to sensationalize but to remember the courage that had survived within terror. We were children of hope. We sought a new home and found instead the measure of the human heart. Dr. Warren, writing in his own time, observed that the disaster's horror had overshadowed its endurance. The true story of the Donner Party is not of what hunger made of them, but of how long they continued to call themselves a family even when civilization had vanished. By the turn of the century, travelers could ride trains through the same pass in a single day. The lake was renamed in memory of the Donners, and a granite monument now marks the site. Beneath it, the forest has grown back, tall and indifferent. The historian ends his chronicle with these words. Each winter the mountains close their road again, and each spring they open it. Somewhere in that cycle the past continues, waiting under snow, quiet and forgiving.